Randall in Arkansas, pronouns are he, him, wants to talk about the ethics surrounding death penalty and life incarceration. So welcome, Randall.
Hey, Matt and Paul. Pleasure to talk with you guys. Longtime fan of both of you. Somebody, not saying who, commented that we should hang question marks on long-held positions. And that's forced me to kind of reevaluate something. So I've kind of long thought that the death penalty has been a necessary option, given the human condition. We can be very violent. And, but thanks to you, I've had to kind of reevaluate, critical thinking made me explore how can we be certain enough to use it? And, it's kind of a poor punishment. It's not really good as a penalty because unless you believe in an afterlife, it pretty much, that's the end of the game, right? So you're not punishing somebody after it's applied. And it's not a very good deterrent. But also the ethics of, we have to protect, we have an obligation to each other, and we put a lot of people in jail, for quote unquote the rest of their lives. I mean, I've served on a jury in a murder trial, and we had to make, this decision, and kind of always plagued me. How do we deal with this? And so I was kind of thinking that maybe the best thing for us to do is, if we get permission, should we be getting consent from the people that we say, all right, you can't be out in public anymore. You've done terrible things. You have an option. Go here for the rest of your life, or we can execute you. I mean, is that the only real ethical way to be able to apply it?
So my position on matters related to death penalty has changed a lot over the years. I don't know where Paul's at, but on this issue of shouldn't we require consent before executing them, should we also require consent before giving them a ticket or a fine or locking them up?
I mean, they've been convicted, right? They have to be convicted, and they will have, obviously the crime has to be there. Yeah.
I maybe I'm misunderstanding what you said, but you seem to suggest that we should. It says here in the screening thing, more specifically, requiring consent from the convicted person before execution. Why is it that we should require consent before conviction or before execution when we don't require it before giving a ticket or putting them in jail?
It's not before conviction. It's after conviction, before executing them. They're convicted.
Am I using the wrong word? Am I using the wrong? Why do you think we should require consent before execution, but not consent before jailing them?
Well, I mean, if you're taking part in this, if you're taking part in our society, if you're living in this country, living under these rules, you are then consenting to those laws. Yes,
exactly. Why? And I think that this is the same thing. You seem to be stuck on this idea of, and it says here specifically, more specifically, requiring consent from the convicted person before execution. And my question was, what is the exception that makes you want consent before execution, but not consent before jail? Because your answer was, if you're playing in the system and you're taking part in the system, then you're giving your consent to potentially go to jail. How is it not the same thing to say if you're participating in the system and you know that the death penalty is available, then you are giving your consent to potentially being executed? It's not like being in the system, you give consent to some penalties, but not others, because if that's the case, then I just don't consent to ever being jailed at all.
Well, I think the difference there comes down to, can we be certain enough to enforce the removal of someone's life, right? Stopping that.
Now you're talking about two different things, Randall, because I'm in agreement. I'm in agreement with you. My reason for no longer supporting the death penalty is that I don't think the system produces results that are sufficiently confident that I'm comfortable with killing someone. But that's a completely different issue than whether or not we should get consent from a person before execution. Whether or not there should be execution is a discussion, but you wanted to talk about whether or not we should be getting consent from the convicted. And my question is this: didn't they consent given your own policy of consent that by participating in the system, they consented to being jailed and the other consequences?
You there, Randall?
Yeah, I'm
He's thinking
positive,
something a lot of
yes.
people don't do, and that's great.
Yeah.
I don't get me. You know, I
So,
love the fact that
yeah.
Randall's going to pause and actually consider what I said, rather than what 95% of the callers do, which is just, no, you're wrong, and here's why.
Right. And this is why I'm having the conversation, is because I'm trying to make sure I'm not going around in my own head about something, getting stuck, taking the same left turn.
I want to get Paul in to find out what Paul's thoughts are. But here's
Randall, my hypothetical to you, I guess, is like, so I'm in a weird position. I'm incredibly claustrophobic. I've also been close to death once, and have made peace with that. So, if I know that if I was scheduled for life in prison, I would love to opt for the option of saying, would you just kill me instead of keeping me in jail for 30 years? So in your view, are you basically letting prisoners or letting convicted felons choose the punishment that they would like? Because the only people who are going to say, yeah, you got me, kill me, are people who are okay with dying in some way. Right? So essentially what you're giving them is you're giving them a wish fulfillment at that point. And at that point, as ineffective as a death penalty may be in being a deterrent, adding the option that, hey, I can pick my own flavor of punishment seems like even less deterrent. So I'm not sure why you would even have a death penalty on the table at that point.
Well, I mean, I think that why do we have it, right? We have, why do we have it at all? Comes down to, I think, effectively the prevention. I mean, that's really the only thing the death penalty can do here for us. Other than that, serve some kind of level of serve to that sense of retribution, justice, vengeance, and that's not really what it. I mean, that's a byproduct. I don't think that should be the goal of it.
Right, and of course, getting permission would strip that as well. Right, would strip even more of the sense of retribution from the victims' families, because this is something that the person said, "Yeah, I'm good with this." So
they might, and the victim's family might not be cool with it. They might not want that to be an option. Maybe that is very much something that has to be considered.
So
I don't like that it's usually touted in our system as a function of, look how many people that we've executed. Aren't we protecting you well? Right. I don't like that it's something that's, used by politicians to saber rattle. It's a serious deal, and I'm just trying to make sure that I give it some weight, some review. Yeah.
But Randall, is some of your trepidation, like, what if there were more? What if there was more regulations? For example, like, oh, well, we only have the death penalty when there's affirmed DNA evidence, or like, what if you started layering things on top of it that aren't the consent of the person? Because that seems entirely arbitrary. And in fact, some of those,
there's
false convictions.
I mean, how do we? Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, all I was going to say was that some of those false convictions, like we like to watch true crime a lot around here, and some of the times there's false convictions, and sometimes they're protecting someone else, and that person's just going to, if your motive to take a prison sentence is to protect someone else, you're going to sign up for that death penalty too, like to protect them from that. So I'm not sure that like this isn't any kind of ultimate safeguard against wrongful death. And you're also not, you think you're, even though I'm not necessarily in favor of it, you're stripping away even some of the reasons to have it. So I guess I'm not sure what you're adding by this consent.
Yeah, and I think that the real problem is solved by abolishing the death penalty.
And I guess that's ultimately where I'm getting at is if we can't reliably apply it via the system that we have, then we're either stuck with getting rid of it, or shaping it into a fashion, applying levels of control or layers of control that make it a reasonable thing to use. And where I get stuck is there are things that people do that just are that kind of graduate to that level. And, and I guess if that's where we get to, I mean, I don't think I could ever on a jury actually be okay with saying, yes, go ahead and do the death penalty because of, what if this prosecutor didn't, or this prosecutor didn't share evidence and so on and so forth. Right. And so this is not, we're not getting the whole picture. So, okay.
Yeah.
No, thank you for giving me this consideration. The conversation here is certainly giving me something better to think about. And the only thing I got left for you is that I have, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say there's a slight tangent off of something that Paul was talking about people who might, the people who would consent to putting you to death doesn't get you any more confidence that you were right in your conviction, because people may have ulterior motives in the same way that some people confess to crimes they didn't do and things like that. I don't see that consent solves the problem at all. And so I'm just going to still look at abolishing. But
okay. That's fair.
Thanks for calling.
So last thing for you. I have discovered a methodology to test and confirm the supernatural, and it is
I bet he hung up.
Yeah, it used to be, the hang up show used to hang up on people.
Yeah. It used to be, I used to let people hang up on me. So he picked a really good way to do it. Hey, I've got some really interesting proof for you, but